All right, so you want to deep dive into Trump on Rogan and, okay, specifically how he talked about tariffs. Buckle up, because we're going way beyond those little sound bites everybody's playing to figure out what he was really getting at.
What gets me is how Trump connects tariffs to this idea of psychological advantage, and not just in economics, but a global power move, you know?
Yeah, let's break down this whole psychological advantage thing.
Right.
He actually compares it to a fighter's mindset, right?
Yeah.
Like UFC.
Totally. He even talks about Lincoln and his struggles with Robert E. Lee, and how some of the best fighters ever, they've had to overcome these huge mental hurdles. It's like he sees resilience, that mental toughness, as the key to being a great leader.
He definitely paints a picture of himself as this fighter, too.
Yeah.
Always battling some rigged system, like it's the deep state or the fake news media. There's always an opponent.
And that's where tariffs come in, I think. He sees them as this weapon to level the playing field, especially against China.
Oh, yeah. You remember that line when he says tariffs is a more beautiful word than love?
Classic Trump, right? Total hyperbole. But if you listen closer, he's tapping into this very real economic anxiety that a lot of Americans feel.
It's like he's saying, look, China's building coal plants every week. They're polluting like crazy. Then they turn around and lecture us about climate change. All while they're taking advantage of our trade deals. Tariffs are the answer.
It's a simplified argument, but it works for a lot of people who feel like the system is rigged against them.
And he even suggests replacing income tax with tariffs, completely. He brings up this example of a blue ribbon commission back in the 1880s that was swimming in tariff revenue.
That's a radical idea. Most economists would say relying only on tariffs would be super risky, could lead to higher prices for everyone.
But Trump sees it as this golden age for America.
Yeah.
And he wants to bring that back. He's yearning for that time when America was this manufacturing powerhouse, and he thinks tariffs are the way to get those jobs back.
Remember, tariffs are basically taxes on imported goods. So they might encourage some companies to manufacture in the U.S., but it also makes those goods more expensive for everyone.
He tries to counter that by talking about Elon Musk and Tesla. He says tariffs can push companies to manufacture here, just like Tesla's doing.
He even tells the story about a car factory in Mexico that he claims he stopped single-handedly just by threatening huge tariffs. Whether that's totally true or not, it shows how much he believes in using economic leverage to get his way.
Yeah, that's that classic art of the deal mentality.
Yeah.
He's a negotiator, and tariffs are just another tool for him.
But it's a tool that can backfire. Trade wars, retaliation from other countries, higher prices for consumers. There are downsides to consider.
So basically what you're saying is that while Trump's all excited about tariffs, the reality is way more complicated.
Absolutely. And it's important for you listening to think about the good and the bad before you decide what you think about this whole tariff thing.
Okay, so we've unpacked tariffs. Let's move on to something else interesting from this conversation. His perspective on being a political outsider when he first came into office.
Yeah, this is where we see Trump dealing with all the craziness of Washington, D.C., a world he knew nothing about before becoming president.
He says he only visited D.C. 17 times before becoming president. And never stayed overnight.
It's like he was thrown into this totally new environment, having to rely on his gut and advice from people he didn't really know.
And he admits he made mistakes, especially when it came to picking his advisors. He specifically calls out the neocons, which, for those who don't know, are basically hawkish foreign policy experts.
He definitely feels like he was surrounded by people pushing him in directions he didn't want to go.
It's like he's saying, hey, I came with zero experience, I was learning as I went, and yeah, I messed up sometimes. But he also takes credit for the wins, like tax cuts, deregulation, and the good economy before COVID hit.
He sees himself as a disruptor, someone who came in to shake things up. And, even if you disagree with how he did it, there's no question he changed things in Washington.
And don't forget the constant feeling of being under attack. He talks about those impeachment attempts and the media scrutiny from the moment he stepped into the Oval Office.
That idea of survival is a big part of how he sees things. He's always fighting against forces trying to take him down.
He even argues that the media constantly focusing on his controversial stuff actually helped him because it connected with people who felt ignored and didn't trust those traditional institutions.
It's a weird dynamic, right? On one side, you have the media criticizing him, and on the other side, you have this whole group of people who feel like the media and the politicians aren't representing them.
And Trump positions himself as their voice. He's the outsider, the fighter, the one who says what others won't.
And that's a powerful message, especially now with all the political division and unrest.
Okay, we've covered a lot, but there's still so much more to talk about. Next, we'll dig into Trump's views on China, the environment, nuclear power, and his take on election integrity.
Things are about to get really interesting. And remember, these are complicated issues with lots of different perspectives.
We'll be careful to give you the context and highlight the key points. Stay tuned for part 2 of our deep dives.
So we left off with Trump as this outsider, right? And now let's look at how that plays out with China and the environment. It's tricky because he seems to contradict himself.
Yeah, he's super tough on China about the environment, but then he kind of downplays global warming himself. Yeah. So how does that even make sense?
It's like he's always looking at it from that America First angle. We talked about that before. He slams China for those coal plants and polluting the oceans, but then brags about his own clean air and water record.
So it's like, we're doing good here in America, but China needs to clean up its act.
But then he switches to nuclear power, saying that's even more dangerous than climate change. And he's not into those global talks about it at all.
Oh yeah, when he called those negotiators idiots. He really thinks he's the only one who can handle these big global problems.
That's part of his whole strongman image, the tough guy who doesn't back down. And this leads right into election integrity, which is a whole other controversial thing.
Definitely a sensitive topic. We got to be careful here. And remember, these are Trump's claims. And a lot of people disagree with him.
Right. We can't say it's all true, but we do need to understand where he's coming from and why he keeps saying this stuff.
He's totally convinced that 2020 was rigged. He gives all these examples of fraud and says we got to go back to paper ballots. He even brings up Elon Musk, saying Musk agrees with him.
Using Musk's name is interesting. It's like he wants to make his claims seem more believable by connecting them to this tech innovator guy.
But even Musk gets called out for spreading misinformation.
Totally. Just because someone's good at one thing doesn't mean they're an expert on everything else.
This whole thing just shows how much Trump's still fighting those election results.
Yeah.
Even years later.
It's part of this bigger trend where people don't trust institutions anymore, and they believe those conspiracy theories.
Okay, let's take a break from this serious stuff for a sec. Remember that part where they go off on this UFC tangent?
Yeah, it was kind of random, but also insightful to hear Trump talk about fighting. He's really into it.
It was cool hearing him break down the fighters and their strengths and weaknesses. He really knows his stuff.
And he connects it to politics, saying you got to be tough, resilient, to know how to take a punch.
He even uses this championship peak idea, saying you judge fighters by their best, not when they're starting out or fading away.
Makes you wonder if he sees his own time as president that way? Was that his peak? Or is he trying to make a comeback?
Good question. Now back to the serious stuff. Trump had a lot to say about healthcare and big pharma too.
This is where RFK Jr. comes in. That guy Trump wants to put in charge of health stuff. He's a controversial choice.
Yeah, Trump says RFK Jr. is sincere and that Big Pharma won't be happy because he's critical of vaccines.
That raises some red flags. What would RFK Jr.'s views mean for health policy?
He's really skeptical about vaccines.
And that goes against what most scientists say.
Trump also spent a lot of time criticizing the U.S. healthcare system. He showed Rogan all these charts comparing costs and outcomes to other countries, saying the U.S. system's failing.
He's got a point. The U.S. spends the most but doesn't always get the best results.
But he doesn't offer any real solutions. He just points out the problem and blames Big Pharma for getting rich off sick people.
It's a message that works for people who don't trust corporations and doctors.
And it makes you wonder what'll happen with RFK Jr. in the picture. If Trump wins, could be a big fight.
Definitely something to watch. Okay, almost done with this deep dive, but there's one last kind of mysterious part to talk about. The JFK files and UAPs.
This is where Trump gets all vague. Like he knows secrets, but can't tell.
He talks about releasing some of the JFK files, saying good people told him not to open them all the way.
He says it's about protecting people and national security, but also hints that there's more to it.
It's all very ambiguous. Makes you wonder what he's really talking about.
And then just when you think it can't get weirder, he brings up UAPs.
Unidentified aerial phenomena, what we used to call UFOs. He says maybe there are government programs he didn't even know about. Like there's a whole other level of secrecy.
He even says these things could have technology way beyond ours. It's a total cliffhanger.
Definitely gets your imagination going. What else is out there?
Okay, so we went through a ton of stuff in this Trump-Rogan conversation. But let's step back for a second. What does it all mean? Man, that was wild. We went from like tariffs to UFOs to JFK. It's a lot.
That's Trump for you. Always keeps things interesting and controversial, and never gives you all the answers.
So what's the takeaway? What did we learn from this 3-hour talkathon?
I think we got a good look inside Trump's head. He's still the same guy, loud out smoking, still holding on to those grudges against the media, the politicians, anyone he sees as an enemy.
He's not going to hold back, that's for sure, even if it makes people mad. But there were times when he seemed more thoughtful, too.
Yeah, like when he was talking about how hard it is to run the country, or those historical figures he admires. There's more to him than just the headlines.
And he seems really passionate about certain things, like bringing back factory jobs or fixing healthcare.
Even if you don't agree with his ideas, he's talking about things that worry people, that they're struggling with.
So what about the future? He's thinking about running for president again. What happens if he wins?
Based on what we heard. It's gonna be a wild ride. He'll probably push even harder on America first. More tariffs. Keep saying the 2020 election was rigged.
What about those weird hints he dropped? Like that cleansing with the JFK files? Or secret UFO programs?
People are going to be talking about that for a while. It's like he's throwing out these mysteries to keep everyone guessing and keep himself in the spotlight.
It's all part of the show, right? You can love him or hate him, but you can't ignore him.
Totally. And whether you agree with him or not, this conversation shows how important it is to hear different viewpoints and think for yourself.
That's what this deep dive was all about. We take these complicated topics, break them down, and give you the info you need to make up your own mind.
We don't avoid the tough stuff, but we try to show you all sides of the story.
It's up to you listening to decide what you believe and where you stand.
Keep learning, keep asking questions, and don't stop thinking critically.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Donald Trump's mind. We'll be back soon with another one. Until then, stay curious.